Liberate Yourself from Classical Karate by Bruce Lee. What is Jeet Kune? I am the first to admit that any attempt to crystallize Jeet Kune into a written article is no easy task. Perhaps to avoid making a thing out of a process, I have not until now personally written an article on JKD. Indeed, it is difficult to explain what Jeet Kune is, although it may be easier to explain what it is not. Let me begin with a Zen story. The story might be familiar to some, but I repeat it for its appropriateness. Look upon this story as a means of limbering up one's senses, one's attitude and one's mind to make them pliable and receptive. You need to understand this article, otherwise you might as well forget reading any further. A learned man once went to a Zen teacher to inquire about Zen. As the Zen teacher explained, the learned man would frequently interrupt him with remarks like, "Oh yes, we have that too," and so on. Finally, the Zen teacher stopped talking and began serving tea to the learned man. He poured the cup full and then kept pouring until the cup overflowed. "Enough," the learned man once more interrupted. "No more can go into the cup." "Indeed, I see," answered the Zen teacher. "If you do not first empty your cup, how can you taste my cup of tea?" I hope my comrades in the martial arts will read the following paragraphs with open-mindedness, leaving all the burdens of preconceived opinions and conclusions behind. This act, by the way, has in itself a liberating power. After all, the usefulness of the cup is in its emptiness. Make this article relate to yourself, because though it's on JKD, it is primarily concerned with the blossoming of a martial artist, not a Chinese martial artist, a Japanese martial artist, etc. A martial artist is a human being first. Just as nationalities have nothing to do with one's humanity, so they have nothing to do with the martial arts. Leave your protective shell of isolation and relate directly to what is being said. Return to your senses by ceasing all the intervening intellectual mumbo-jumbo. Remember that life is a constant process of relating. Remember too that I seek neither your approval nor to influence you towards my way of thinking. I will be more than satisfied if, as a result of this article, you begin to investigate everything for yourself and cease to uncritically accept prescribed formulas that dictate this is this and that is that. On choiceless observation. Suppose several persons who are trained in different style of combative arts witness an all-out street fight. I am sure that we would hear different versions from each of these stylists. This is quite understandable, for one cannot see a fight or anything else as is, as long as he is blinded by his chosen point of view, i.e. style, and he will view the fight through the lens of his particular conditioning. Fighting, as is simple and total. It is not limited to your perspective or conditioning. As a Chinese martial artist, a Korean martial artist, or whatever martial artist, true observation begins when one sheds patterns, and true freedom of expression occurs when one is beyond systems. Before we examine Jeet Kune, let's consider exactly what a classical martial art style really is. To begin with, we must recognise the incontrovertible fact that regardless of their many colourful origins, by a wise man, a mysterious monk, by a special messenger in a dream, in a holy revelation, etc., styles are created by men. A style should never be considered gospel truth, the laws and principles of which can never be violated. Man, the living, creating individual, is always more important than any established style. It is conceivable that a long time ago a certain martial artist discovered some partial truth. During his lifetime, the man resisted the temptation to organise this partial truth, although this is a common tendency in a man's search for security and certainty in life. After his death, his student took his hypothesis, his postulates, his inclination and his method and turned them into law. Impressive creeds were then invented, solemn reinforcing ceremonies prescribed, rigid philosophy and patterns formulated, and so on, until finally an institution was erected. So, what originated as one man's intuition of some sort of personal fluidity has been transformed into solidified, fixed knowledge, complete with organised classified responses presented in a logical order. In so doing, the well-meaning, loyal followers have not only made this knowledge a holy shrine, but also a tomb in which they have buried the founder's wisdom. But the distortion does not necessarily end here. In reaction to the other's truth, another martial artist, or possibly a dissatisfied disciple, organises an opposite approach, such as the soft style versus the hard style, the internal school versus the external school, and all of these separative nonsenses. Soon this opposite faction also becomes a large organisation with its own laws and patterns. A rivalry begins with each style claiming to possess the truth to the exclusion of all others. At best, styles are merely parts dissected from a unitary whole. All styles require adjustments, partiality, denials, condemnation, and a lot of self-justification. The solutions they purport to provide are the very cause of the problem, because they limit and interfere with our own natural growth and obstruct the way to genuine understanding. Divisive by nature, styles keep men apart from each other rather than unite them. The truth cannot be structured or confined. One cannot express himself fully when he is imprisoned by a confining style. Combat as is total, and it includes all of that is as well as is not, without favourite lines or angles. Lacking boundaries, combat is always fresh, alive, and constantly changing. Your particular style, your personal inclinations, and your physical makeup are all parts of combat, but they do not constitute the whole of combat. Should your responses become dependent on any single part, you will react in terms of what should be, rather than to the reality of the ever-changing what is. Remember that, while the whole is evidenced in all of its parts, an isolated part, efficient or not, does not constitute the whole. Prolonged, repetitious drillings will certainly yield mechanical precision and security of the kind that comes from any routine. However, it is exactly this kind of selective security or crutch which limits or blocks the total growth of a martial artist. In fact, quite a few practitioners develop such a liking for and dependence on their crutch that they can no longer walk without it. Thus, anyone's special technique, however cleverly designed, is actually a hindrance. Let it be understood once and for all that I have not invented a new style, composite, or modification. I have in no way set Jeet Kune Do within a distinct form, governed by laws that distinguish it from this style or that method. On the contrary, I hope to free my comrades from bondage to styles, patterns, and doctrines. What then is Jeet Kune Do? Literally, Jeet means to intercept or to stop, Kune is the fist, and Do is the way, the ultimate reality, the way of the intercepting fist. Do remember, however, that Jeet Kune Do is merely a convenient name. I am not interested in the term itself, I am interested in its effect of liberation when JKD is used as a mirror for self-examination. Unlike a classical martial art, there is no series of rules or classifications of technique that constitutes a distinct Jeet Kune Do method of fighting. JKD is not a form of special conditioning with its own rigid philosophy. It looks at combat not from a single angle, but from all possible angles. While JKD utilises all ways and means to serve its end, after all, efficiency is anything that scores, it is bound by none, and it is therefore free. In other words, JKD possesses everything but is in itself possessed by nothing. Therefore, try and define JKD in terms of a distinct style, be it Kung Fu, Karate, street fighting, Bruce Lee's martial art, etc., is to completely miss its meaning. Its teaching simply cannot be confined within a system. Since JKD is at once this and not this, it neither opposes nor adheres to any style. To understand this fully, one must transcend from duality of for and against into one organic unity, which is without distinction. Understanding of JKD is direct intuition of its unity. There are no prearranged sects or kata in the teaching of JKD, nor are they necessary. Consider the subtle differences between having no form and having no form. The first is ignorance, the second is transcendence. Through instinctive body feeling, each of us knows our own most efficient and dynamic manner of achieving effective leverage, balance in motion, economical in use of energy, etc. Patterns, techniques, or forms touch only the fringe of genuine understanding. The core of understanding lies in the individual mind, and until that is touched, everything is uncertain and superficial. Truth cannot be perceived until we come to fully understand ourselves and our potentials. After all, knowledge in martial arts ultimately means self-knowledge. At this point you may ask, how do I gain this knowledge? That you will have to find out all by yourself. You must accept the fact that there is no help but self-help. For the same reason I cannot tell you how to gain freedom. Since freedom exists within you, I cannot tell you how to gain self-knowledge. While I can tell you what not to do, I cannot tell you what you should do, since that would be confining you to a particular approach. Formulas can only inhibit freedom. Externally dictated prescriptions only squelch creativity and assure mediocrity. Bear in mind that the freedom that occurs from self-knowledge cannot be acquired through strict adherence to a formula. We do not suddenly become free, we simply are free. Learning is definitely not mere imitation, nor is it the ability to accumulate and regurgitate fixed knowledge. Learning is a constant process of discovery, a process without end. In JKD we begin not by accumulation, but by discovering the cause of our ignorance, a discovery that involves a shedding process. Unfortunately, most students in the martial arts are conformists. Instead of learning to depend on themselves for expression, they blindly follow their instructors, no longer feeling alone and finding security in mass imitation. The product of this imitation is a dependent mind. Independent inquiry, which is essential to genuine understanding, is sacrificed. Look around the martial arts and witness the assortment of routine performers, trick artists, desensitized robots, glorifiers of the past and so on, all followers or exponents of organized despair. How often are we told by different sensei or masters that the martial arts are life itself? But how many of them truly understand what they are saying? Life is a constant movement, rhythmic as well as random. Life is a constant change and not stagnation. Instead of choicelessly flowing with this process of change, many of these masters, past and present, have built an illusion of fixed forms, rigidly subscribing to the traditional concepts and techniques of the art, solidifying the ever-flowing, dissecting the totality. The most pitiful sight is to see sincere students earnestly repeating those imitative drills, listening to their own screams and spiritual yells. In most cases, the means these sensei offer their students are so elaborate that the student must give tremendous attention to them, until gradually he loses sight of the end. The students end up performing their methodical routines as a mere conditioned response, rather than responding to what is. They no longer listen to circumstances, they recite their circumstances. These poor souls have unwittingly become trapped in the miasma of classical martial arts training. A teacher, a really good sensei, is never a giver of truth. He is a guide, a pointer to the truth that the student must discover for himself. A good teacher therefore studies each student individually and encourages the student to explore himself, both internally and externally, until ultimately the student is integrated with his being. For example, a skillful teacher might spur his student's growth by confronting him with certain frustrations. A good teacher is a catalyst. Besides possessing a deep understanding, he must also have a responsive mind with great flexibility and sensitivity. A finger pointing to the moon. There is no standard in total combat, and expression must be free. This liberating truth is a reality only insofar as it is experienced and lived by the individual himself. It is a truth that transcends style or disciplines. Remember too that Jeet Kune Do is merely a term, a label to be used as a boat to get across. Once across, it's to be discarded and not carried on one's back. These few paragraphs are at best a finger pointing to the moon. Please do not take the finger to be the moon, or fix your gaze so intently on the finger as to miss all the beautiful sights of heaven. After all, the usefulness of the finger is pointing away from itself to the light which illuminates the finger and all. The end.